Hello, everyone, and welcome to Talk Nerdy. It's Monday, June 5th, and I'm your host, Cara Santa Maria. Now, before we dive into the episode, and this one is a doozy, guys, we're going to be chatting today with a NASA astronaut. But before we do, I want to thank those of you who made Talk Nerdy possible this week. Remember, Talk Nerdyism will always be 100% free to download. That's the model. It's not going to change. And I'm able to support the show with both advertisements, but a big part, honestly, what really gets the bills paid is support from you, the listener. And there were a bunch of you who supported this week, either by visiting www.patreon.com/talknerdy or by going to my website, carasantamaria.com/talknerdy and clicking through to the PayPal portal. So I want to thank Phil T-Bear, Timothy Glover, Jonathan Wright, Christian Jeffrey, Jeffrey Perez, Stuart Ogue, The Honorable Husband, Jafe, Gabriel Felipe Jaramillo Gonzalez, Brian Holden, Jeffrey Sewell, and last but not least, Rob Schreck. Thank you so much for your support. There's also a bunch of really cool stuff that you can buy in the Talk Nerdy store. Just visit my website and you'll be able to find all of that cool swag there. And of course, I think one of the most helpful, honestly, ways that you can support the show is by rating and reviewing on iTunes, on Google Play, on all the different places where you download your podcasts, and also sharing with your friends and your family through different social media sites. And guys, say hi to me on Twitter at Cara Santa Maria, Facebook, facebook.com/ScienceCara, even Instagram, even though that's mostly just pictures of Killer. Okay, so I'm really excited about this week's episode. I get to welcome to the show former NASA astronaut, or I should say retired NASA astronaut. Honestly, I think once a NASA astronaut, always a NASA astronaut. But his name is Ron Garan, and he's currently the chief pilot for Worldview Enterprises. He also, oversees an entire initiative that called Fragile Oasis, which is based on both his book, but also just his general viewpoint, which is called the Orbital Perspective, which helps people take a step back from their lives, look at the Earth from that orbital perspective, and make better decisions about conservation, about kindness, and about really just taking care of our planet and the people that live on it. What else? There's so much cool stuff to say about Ron. He has spent 178 days in space, 23 hours and 54 minutes. He has been on multiple missions. He's done 4 total spacewalks and spent 27 hours and 3 minutes in space outside of the space station. He's also an aquanaut. He went on the Nemo 9 mission and spent 18 days, 3 hours, and 14 minutes at the bottom of the ocean. But it's way less interesting coming from me. So without any further ado, guys, here he is, Ron Garan. Well, Ron, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, Cara. It's great to be here.
Hi. Okay, so you are hailing, do you live in, am I getting this right, Arizona?
That's correct, Tucson.
And then when you were flying all the time on your missions as a NASA astronaut, did you then just travel to Houston, or were you living in Houston at the time?
Oh, no, I lived in Houston. All the astronauts that are flying for NASA live in Houston, and I just moved out to Tucson about 1.5 years ago when I took a job with Worldview Enterprises out here. So that's what brought me out here.
That is so exciting. So when did you officially end your tenure with NASA?
October 1st, 2013.
So not long ago.
No, a few years ago.
But it must feel like a completely different life now.
In a lot of ways it does. In a lot of ways it's the same way. People ask me why I left my dream job, because people that know me know that I worked my entire life to achieve the goal of flying in space. And, why would I leave that? And I really left for one very compelling reason. I left so that I could share the perspective of our planet that I gained through my time in space, and to share that as wide as I can, unencumbered and basically full time. And so everything I've done since leaving NASA has been done with the goal to figuratively transport people to that vantage point where we could see the big picture perspective.
What a wonderful life mission, because honestly, when it comes down to it, what good is having done all of those things if you can't share them with the world?
Well, exactly. I mean, I left space with a call to action, right? I understand that I am incredibly privileged and fortunate, and I had this, wonderful opportunity, or many wonderful opportunities that I'm very grateful for. And because of that, I feel, a deep responsibility, a deep obligation to share that experience with as many people as I can. And it's not all altruistic, because I think any experience that you have becomes richer for yourself if you're able to share it with others and have other people, experience the joy and the awe that you experienced.
And you've been doing that through a lot of different outlets since you left NASA. I mean, obviously, you did it while you were at NASA, because astronauts in so many ways are not just scientists or fighter pilots or, explorers, but they really are science communicators and evangelists for space travel. So, obviously, while you were at NASA, people were listening to you and they were hanging on every word. But even since you left NASA, you've been doing this in a lot of different outlets. You've written a book. You've worked on many different humanitarian missions that have dual goals of improving the world, at its most basic level, making sure there's clean water for individuals, et cetera, but also getting people really excited about thinking about the future, being stewards of our planet, and exploring beyond the frontiers of Earth. So I'd love to break down some of the things that you've been doing more lately, but maybe before we dive into that, let's talk about the past, because come on, you're an astronaut. We got to know what it's like in space. So I'm looking at your bio here, 178 days in space, 27 hours and 3 minutes of spacewalking, of EVA. And I love that you broke it down this way, too. 71,075,867 miles in 2,842 orbits of our planet. Because, of course, when you're on the space station, you're just zipping around, aren't you?
Yeah, 5 miles a second, 17,500 miles an hour for 6 months at a time racks up a lot of miles. And what's really cool is, because, we're government employees, so we get 5 cents a mile. So that was awesome.
That's hilarious. And of course, doesn't that mean a lot of really bizarre sunrises and sunsets?
It does. But before you get past this, so people don't get the wrong idea, I was just kidding. We don't get 5 cents a mile. We're going to get all these nasty emails now about how we're taking advantage of the taxpayers' money.
Right. But, no, you would be owed probably a lot of back payment if that were the case.
Yeah. We get a sunrise or a sunset every 45 minutes, and there's every single one of them is unique, and every single one of them is absolutely spectacular.
It's so cool. And were you the kind of astronaut who just spent a lot of time with your face glued out the window? I mean, obviously, when you weren't actively working, just staring at all of the amazing scenery that you got to see? Yeah,
every available bit of free time I had, which, as you probably know, is not much on a space station mission. My face was plastered to a window, just taking it all in, because it's indescribably beautiful, and it's never the same. It's constantly changing, and people ask me if I got bored during my 6 months on the space station. I can honestly say I was never bored. If you even feel the first inkling of being bored, all you have to do is go to a window and look out the window, and I guarantee you won't be bored. So,
man, it must be, obviously somebody like yourself, you worked your whole life. You even mentioned this previously. You work your whole life to have your dream job, which really is to be an explorer beyond the boundaries of Earth. You, at some point, decided that you wanted to go for it and be an astronaut, and you did the training that was necessary. Is there ever fear involved? Like, I obviously have not even remotely thought about that kind of a career. And part of the reason for that, other than the fact that I don't have the skill sets required, is that it kind of scares the piss out of me, the idea of leaving Earth. Did you ever have fear that you had to get past, or was it just not in your vocabulary?
No, I mean, it's very obvious, and it's very real that you're facing danger and in some cases, extreme danger in certain aspects of a spaceflight. Certainly, the launch can be very dangerous. Coming through the atmosphere at 5 miles a second on fire is pretty dangerous. The spacewalks are pretty dangerous. even just during normal days, we had a piece of space junk come really, really close to the space station, and had it hit the space station, it would destroy the entire space station. So even when you're just up there doing your normal business, going about your routines and your duties, that you're in some level of danger, and it's a hostile environment. And so, I mean, everybody experiences some level of apprehension when they're doing something really, really dangerous. I think you probably have a little bit of an elevated heart rate and, some adrenaline maybe. But you got to work through all that. And when you're on a spacewalk, for instance, I was never not aware that I was in constant danger, that a speck of dust, a speck of paint could hit my spacesuit at any moment, and that would be the end of the day for me. Or that I could go floating off the space station, or something else could happen, or I could have an electrical short, or some type of malfunction in the suit, and all that was separating me from death, separating me from the vacuum of space, was a very thin piece of material. And so you're in this, for the 7 or 8 hours that you're out there, at least for me, I was in a constant awareness that I was in a very unhospitable, hostile environment, and that I was kind of trespassing on that environment. And but you have a lot of work to do, and you got to get the job done. So you can't dwell on that. You just have. It's kind of in the background, and that's about it.
Yeah, it's funny because I think that for a lot of observers of space content, whether it be legitimate, real footage of spacewalks or conversations from astronauts to Hollywood representations of this stuff, there's sort of a disconnect in our minds between the sort of physics and the knowledge that we have of what orbit really is, right? This idea that you're kind of falling really fast towards Earth, but you keep missing your target, and that's why you're going around and around and around. Mm-hmm. And the fact that there's an experience of kind of low gravity there, but you're moving super fast. You reinforce that. Yet, when we see these movies and things, we really think of space as this kind of floaty, calm environment. How is it for you as an individual experiencing both low gravity but also this insane speed? Do you adapt to it in such a way that it doesn't feel like you're flying around really fast, or are you constantly aware of that?
So it's all relative, right? If you're not looking out the window, you are in a floaty, calm environment. It really is tranquil and peaceful and wonderful. Even if you do look out the window or you happen to be outside, it still is. The Earth is 240 miles below you, on average, I guess. And, even at that altitude, even though you're going over the surface at 5 miles a second, it just seems to be effortlessly turning below you. It's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. It's not like you're going 200 miles an hour around a racetrack and the fence poles are going by in a blur. It really is a very tranquil, peaceful visual experience, but it's more than a visual experience, right? It's a total experience, because you got the sights and the smells and the sounds, and you're floating, so you're detached from it. When you stand at the rim of the Grand Canyon and you look at this beautiful scene, or you're sitting on a beach and you're looking at a beautiful sunset out on the horizon, your gravity is pushing you into that scene. You are connected to the scene through the ground that you're standing on, or the beach that you're sitting on, and intervening water and everything else. But when you're in space, you're looking at an incredibly beautiful scene, but you're detached from it. You're looking at it from the outside, and it really is an amazing experience to have to be outside of that scene of beauty.
Yeah, and you experience like perceptual differences than we do here on Earth. Like all of your senses are keyed into this. So it's not just about what it looks like, but obviously your physical body, your proprioception is different when you're in the ISS. And there are different, smells, there are different flavors to the food that you're eating. The idea of being away from Earth actually does transport you in a way to a kind of a new environment. I remember back when I was a reporter at HuffPost, I had the honor of spending 10 minutes having a conversation with a couple of astronauts while they were in the ISS. And one of those astronauts was Don Pettit, and I had sourced a bunch of questions from my listeners or my viewers, and one of them was, what does space smell like?
Mm-hmm.
And Don said, of course, kind of, there's this idea that space has no smell, but sometimes, and when you're in your EVA, you can't smell anything but your own face. But he was like, when you're in the airlock, there's like a brief moment between when you're outside and when you're back inside. And he said, I remember a distinct smell of like molten metal, like hot metal. And he remembered that as this like flashbulb memory of his experience of space. Do you have any of those kind of really jarring and flashbulb types of memories of kind of sensory experiences that were different than here on Earth?
Yeah, I mean, yes and no. I have an example of both that are different than here on Earth and that are the same. Mm-hmm. So everything that Don Pettit said is true, although I don't. It's an overpowering smell. I mean, it's not like, I catch a little aroma of molten metal. It's an overpowering. When you take your helmet off, all of a sudden, the whole airlock is filled with this smell. And
wow.
I don't really know what causes it, but that smell lingers a little bit in the space station. Like even today, I have crew shirts that I wore, or other pieces of clothing, and they're in these plastic bags. When I open the bag, I can smell that smell, that smell of space, even to the day, which is pretty cool. But I remember the first time I went to the mock-up in Star City for the Russian part of the space station. And I had already flown on the space station at that point. I was on Space Shuttle Discovery in 2008. And I remember going into the mock-up and saying, wow, they got everything right. They even got the smell right. Because there is like a little bit of I don't want to say moldy, but maybe that's the only way to describe it, just a slight hint of like a moldy smell to it, almost like a damp basement or something.
Like inside of the space station.
Inside the space station, yeah, because most of the walls in the Russian space station are made of like a material, and they do have probably a little bit of mold on them, mm-hmm. And it has a very distinct smell. I mean, it doesn't smell bad; it's just a distinct smell, and I think they probably use the same materials in the mock-up as they did on the space station, and they have a unique smell, and yeah, they got it right.
That's so funny. I have heard, and tell me if I'm wrong about this, that the first minute you walk into the space station, there's an overwhelming kind of biological smell, that it's like, oof, you guys have been living in a tin can for a while.
Not
and then
at
you
all.
sort of adapt to it. Oh, is that not true?
No. It's
wow.
I mean, we've got the highest tech air scrubbers in the world or off the world, and yeah. Now it depends on the crew that's on the other side of the hatch when you float through that. You might, you need to find out who told you that, and then figure out what crew is on the other side of the hatch. That's another story.
That's hilarious. Yeah, I mean there are, I think
you can't blame it on the space station.
That's so funny.
It's not space station odor; it's body odor.
Yeah, people are still people. That is true. You can't be completely clean all the time. But I do. I think everybody's really fascinated by the sort of what we think of as taboo questions, the very personal and, kind of what do we do behind closed doors and how that works in space. And Mary Roach, I think, did a great job of capturing a lot of these things in her book, Packing for Mars. Like, how do you use the space toilets and how did they historically use them? And, what are the technologies going to be like moving forward? I remember another question that I asked, I think it was Don at the time, like, what happens if you feel like you have to throw up? And he was like, you don't.
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, but what do you do? He was like, you don't throw up. You swallow it. You do whatever you can do. You do not throw up because it can get really messy there.
Well, people do throw up in space, and hopefully they're near an air sickness bag mm-hmm. at the time. So.
And is it because there is like an air sickness situation up there? Like, do people get sick?
It's space sickness. Most people, if not all people, get over it eventually. But there's, I don't know, maybe 50%, I'm guessing, of the people who fly in space have some type of nausea their first day or two. Some people have it last longer, and it's different levels for different people. And there's really no way to predict who's going to have that and who's not going to have that. And so it's not a big deal because pretty much everybody gets over it. But it's a really provocative environment. You are thrust into a world that you've never been in before. You're thrust into an existence where every rule you've ever known has been thrown out the window. If you want to sleep on the ceiling, go sleep on the ceiling. If you don't want to bend over to pick something up, just flip upside down and turn the ceiling into the floor, the floor into the ceiling. So it's that takes some getting used to for a lot of people.
Yeah, it's almost Seussian or like an MC Escher world. You can really kind of adapt to the environment in whatever way you see fit.
Yeah, that and the gravity that normally holds all your bodily fluids, down towards your feet is no longer working, and it's all floating up. So.
Oh, interesting. So you have to get past these new sensations of like when you're full, it's not like a deepness in your gut. It's just kind of somewhere in the middle. Yeah,
it's hard to describe. One of the things is your head you feel like you have a head cold because again the gravity's not draining the fluid out of your sinuses, and so that's something to get used to.
Do you have to blow your nose a lot just to feel normal?
I don't think so. No. I think most everything you kind of adjust to and get used to, and you just go through life a little bit feeling a little congested. That's all.
Just a little different. Yeah. I tried on a spacesuit once for a television show. It was a new kind of spacesuit design, but they pressurized it, so I got to feel what it feels like and how incredibly limiting your motions are. How hard it was just to tie a knot or to try to connect a carabiner to a pole. I tried out. They actually made me lay down on my stomach and try to do push-ups, and I couldn't get back up, of course. They just laughed at me. But one thing I noticed was that inside, because something you don't think about is that you can't scratch your face. You can't do anything when you're inside of a spacesuit, and because of the pressure, you always want to pop your ears. You want to do that Valsalva thing. So they had actually this thing mounted inside of the helmet where it almost looked like a women's makeup foam applicator, and you would lean down and blow your nose on it. And I was like, this is my saving grace. I can't imagine being in a spacesuit without being able to pop my ears, constantly. Do you have that sensation as well, or do you just kind of get used to your ears always feeling clogged?
It was worse underwater. We trained probably 7 hours for every hour of spacewalk, and we're training at least 7 or probably more hours underwater, and it was more of a problem for me underwater. But that thing that was inside the helmet that you could blow your nose on, you could also scratch your nose on too. So you can you can scratch your nose. But that's it. That's all you can scratch is your nose.
So you got to get really creative. It's so interesting. All the little nuanced things that, of course, space flight requires. I think it's endlessly fascinating. And you mentioned that you train underwater for weightlessness, or for low gravity, I should say. But you also are an aquanaut. Like, legitimately, you have done missions to the bottom of the ocean.
Yeah, and those were as spectacular. I think they're in the same league as the space missions. It was because when you go scuba diving, you could visit a coral reef, right? Mm-hmm. But we were residents of a coral reef. We spent 3 weeks, 18 days, and 18 nights living and working in a coral reef off the coast of Key Largo from Aquarius. Aquarius is the world's only undersea laboratory, and it was. It completely, as much as space changed my perspective of the overall planet that we live on, I think doing those undersea missions completely changed my perspective of our oceans and gave me a much, much deeper appreciation for not only the oceans, but all the life that lives in the oceans.
Oh, it's just incredible. I have to go back to that same question I asked you earlier. Is there fear that comes along with going to such a remote and, again, potentially deadly location?
Yeah, there is, of course, there's apprehension, I would say, where, again, you're in a very, very hostile environment. But a lot of times, what overpowers that apprehension is awe. And when you're when you're awe-inspired, that's a very powerful force, and it's actually a force that's missing in a lot of our discourse here on the Earth's surface. We've kind of lost the ability to experience awe and appreciation and gratitude, because we take a lot of things that are awesome in the true sense of the word, and we take them for granted. And when you see things from space, and when you see things from the undersea perspective, it's hard to ignore that awe.
It's true. I think that's why, and it's a difficult thing to do, but I always advocate for going to places you've never been before, trying to be in other people's shoes. The more that you can see the world through a slightly different lens, the more that we can really appreciate a perspective that's different from our own. But it is difficult, depending on your financial situation, depending on where you live. Americans, we live on a giant island that's kind of separated by a lot of water from a lot of other cultures. And so unfortunately, I think a lot of individuals in the American public haven't had a chance to travel and see the world and gain that perspective. You, of course, have traveled many places, and you've even left Earth, which is just insane. And you did it from a background, which is, I think, and tell me if I'm wrong, a somewhat typical path to becoming an NASA astronaut, in that you were and are a pilot, a fighter pilot, a test pilot. Were you in the Air Force?
I was. Mm-hmm.
And so is that military path make up a kind of decent percentage of would-be astronauts?
Probably. I don't know the exact number, but I would guess around 50%.
Gotcha. So about 50% military, and then about 50% maybe through science and aeronautical engineering. But you did that as well, right? Aeronautical engineering?
I have a degree in aerospace engineering, but I never really worked as an aerospace engineer as a profession.
Maybe not technically, sure, but I think you've probably done a fair amount of aerospace engineering while you're fixing things on the ISS in a spacesuit. Is that really when you do an EVA, when you do a spacewalk, it's generally because there's something that needs adjusting or fixing or updating?
Well, actually, the first 3 spacewalks I did were mostly construction. We were installing the Japanese laboratory to the space station. We did repairs during those spacewalks as well. And there's equipment that has to be swapped out occasionally. There's tanks that have certain gas or other materials in them that get depleted after a while, and you have to replace those. And so, I'd say now that the space station construction is complete, most of the spacewalks are either maintenance, something broke and we're going out to fix it, or it's preventive maintenance, or it's just normal routine maintenance where things that are called expendables that are expended. So we've run out of whatever it is, and we have to swap it out.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Do you feel like that military training made you a little more prepared, or maybe, as prepared as you needed to be before you started your astronaut training? Or was it like, oh yeah, no matter what I did in the past, nothing could prepare me for this?
Well, a little of both. I mean, I personally felt that my military training and my military background was an asset that I could tap into to carry me through certain parts of challenges. But I can tell you that some of the most incredible astronauts in the world were not in the military, and so I don't know how much of a factor that is. I think there are people who are naturally inclined to and have a natural aptitude for that type of thing, and I don't think being in the military is a requirement for that.
Did you know before you started your military training that this was your ultimate goal, or is it something that you kind of stumbled into along the way?
Well, I wanted to be an astronaut since July 20th, 1969. So, I was one of those people, one of those millions and millions of people around the world that watched those first footsteps on the moon. And that, when I was a kid, people say, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And I'd say, "Well, I want to be an astronaut." And they'd say, "Oh, that's nice, but what do you really want to do? What's your plan B?" So I also love to fly, and I got my private pilot's license. I joined the Air Force. I became a fighter pilot, and I really loved what I was doing. And it wasn't until I was 15 years in the Air Force that I even put an application in to be an astronaut. For a number of reasons. One is, it took me that long to get qualified, but also I was really enjoying my career as an F-16 fighter pilot.
All right, guys, I want to take a quick moment to thank the sponsor of this week's episode, and that is Blue Apron, the #1 fresh ingredient and recipe delivery service in the country. Guys, I love Blue Apron because, one, it's affordable. It costs less than $10 per person per meal. Two, there's a ton of variety. You can go on the website and pick out something new each and every week. It's flexible. You can customize those recipes every week based on what you want. They absolutely fit your needs, and there's no weekly commitment. Let's see, 4, it's super easy. Each meal comes with a beautiful full color, step-by-step, easy to follow recipe card, and all the ingredients are pre-portioned, which means that you have a tailor-made meal, but you get to cook it yourself. It's home cooked, and they can all be prepared in 40 minutes or less. And lastly, it's guaranteed. Their freshness guarantee promises that every ingredient arrives ready to cook, or they will make it right. There are some great new meals coming up, including warm smoked trout and asparagus salad with fingerling potatoes and garlic croutons, spiced zucchini enchiladas with creamy lime and tomato rice, and even peach honey glazed chicken with sweet mashed potatoes. Mashed sweet potatoes, I think you can say that either way, collard greens, and Thai basil. Yum, yum. You guys, I don't know what you're waiting for, because get this. As a Talk Nerdy listener, you can get your first 3 meals for free with free shipping. All you've got to do is go to blueapron.com/nerdy. Again, that's blueapron.com/nerdy. All right, guys, let's get back to the show. And you haven't stopped flying, have you? Even though you're retired from NASA, from government work, you're now the chief pilot for Worldview. What is Worldview?
So Worldview is a stratospheric balloon company, if you will. I like to think of ourselves as a perspective company. We have, I talked about how when I left NASA, everything I've done since leaving NASA had the goal of figuratively transporting people to this higher vantage point. I wrote the book, The Orbital Perspective. I'm teaching a course that's also a MOOC, a massive open online course called Introduction to the Orbital Perspective. I had a number of startups. I paint oil pictures. All of these things were to figuratively transport people to this higher vantage point. But now, since I became an employee of Worldview, and I'm leading the flight test program for Worldview, I'm no longer confined to figuratively transporting people. Now I can literally transport people to the edge of space. I can literally transport people to this vantage point, which I think will have a tremendous transformative effect on a lot of folks. And so we have basically 2 things that we're doing. Both of these are going to change people's perspective. One is flying people in a pressurized spacecraft under a high-altitude balloon, up above 100,000 feet, high enough to see the curvature of the Earth, watch the sky turn from blue to black, watch, see how thin the atmosphere is, see the sun against a black sky, not a blue sky, and stay up there for hours at a time. And then when it's time to come back, we detach from the balloon and fly back under a steerable parachute. Now the balloon, when it's fully inflated, is the size of an NFL football stadium. You could fit an NFL football stadium inside the balloon. And the parachute, when we fly it back, is the size of a basketball court. So so we fly back. It's not like a Soyuz landing where it's these round chutes that have a somewhat hard landing. It's landed as if it's an aircraft landing on a runway. And so
you never catch on fire.
We never catch. We don't catch on fire.
That's helpful.
So that's one part of Worldview, and I think that's going to be amazing. But the other part of Worldview, which is equally compelling, if not more, is these things called stratolytes that we're developing. So if you imagine anything that you can do pretty much with a satellite, we can do in the stratosphere with these things that we call stratolytes. So the secret sauce of high altitude ballooning is being able to control where you are, to be able to navigate from point A to point B, or to stay over a specific point on the ground. Imagine what you can do with a high-altitude balloon, 60, 100,000 feet above New York or San Diego or wherever you want to hover. And so it has tremendous applications for disaster response, for telecommunications, for Earth observations, for remote sensing, for scientific discovery. The list goes on. And that's a really, really exciting program that we have going on here.
Gosh, that's incredible. Do we know kind of what the goal time periods are for these things? Obviously, it's happening now in that you're testing all of the components of it and you're working on the flights and everything. But like, when do you think space tourism is really going to be viable? Because there are a few companies that are working on this, on just allowing everyday people to go up and see the world from a new perspective. When do you think that's going to happen? Because it seems like it's right within our grasp.
It is. It's going to happen real soon. So the unmanned stuff we're flying. We have almost 60 missions under our belt right now with that. So that's already happening. The human space flight is a couple years out for us, and it's something that we're working towards. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to use all of these robotic systems to really flush everything out, make sure that we understand this backwards and forwards. We know how the balloons work. We know how the descent systems work. With a large number of flights, a large experience base before we start putting people on these things. And so we want to have a couple of years of really intensive flight operations before we start putting folks on board.
Oh, sure. I mean, you've got to make sure that it's safe. And there's also probably a different threshold for, your everyday space traveler as opposed to somebody who's a trained astronaut. So you've got to worry about things beyond even what maybe not beyond, because of course you're not going quite as far as you would as an astronaut, but you've got to worry about things like basic comfort that maybe an astronaut can kind of, deal with a higher threshold of.
Yeah, well, I mean, everything, we have to deal with everything every other space mission has to deal with except speed. So we are, we gradually ascend to 1,000 feet per minute. It's not... But everything else, I mean, when we get up there, for all intents and purposes, we're in a space environment. You can't survive out there. And so we have all the thermal concerns, we have the pressure concerns, all of that stuff is applicable. But as far as the comfort goes, we carry 8 people on our spacecraft. We will have a bathroom, we will have a bar, we will have Wi-Fi.
Wow.
You're in a shirt sleeve environment. You can send your selfies down.
Hilarious! Oh my gosh, it's like a Disney cruise.
Yeah, it's not gonna be a hardship. It's gonna be nice.
Oh my gosh, it's so funny because I'm still on the fence. I'm not on the fence about whether this needs to happen. Of course, it needs to happen, but I'm on the fence about whether I would even do it. And I think it's just because I don't know if my fear is trumping my awe, which is not good. It's like I know that I want to have had such an experience, but just the idea of, and it's not just about, oh my gosh, I could die, or oh my gosh, it's risky. It's beyond that. It's really about when I peer out the window and I see the curvature of the Earth and I see this backdrop of space, will the awe be white knuckle awe for me? Will I be like questioning my place in the universe, and will I have an existential crisis, or will it really bring me a lot of peace and calm and excitement? I love science, and I read Carl Sagan and it brings me to tears, but I don't know if having my own personal experience of awe wouldn't also be this kind of ambivalent experience where I'm also incredibly frightened about sort of perspective and mortality.
I can't answer that for anybody. I can just tell you what happened to me. When I looked out the window of the space shuttle for the first time and I saw the planet, I was filled with this incredible sense of awe, this incredible sense of gratitude for the opportunity to have this experience and to see the planet from this perspective, and gratitude for the planet that we've all been given. And I think one of the most powerful parts of this is, and I really can't explain why this happened, but I felt an incredibly deep interconnection with every single person on the planet. I felt like my circle of kinship, if you will, extended to the entire planet, and it completely redefined my definition of the word home. And so, the chance that could happen to you is well worth the risk. I'm not a daredevil. I don't do stuff just for the thrill of the danger at all. I'm completely not that type of person. But to me, it's a risk-benefit trade-off. And, are the benefits or even the potential benefits worth the risk. And I pretty much guarantee you that you'd be happy that you had the experience if you're given the choice.
I'm already getting so excited. And, I think just what you were speaking to right there, it's obviously sort of underpins all of the decisions that you've made since leaving NASA. It underpins the probably the impetus to write the book, The Orbital Perspective, to do the outreach that you do, giving the talks, speaking to schools, sharing your perspective with as many people as possible, both through your words and, like you said, through your artwork. And of course, you're now doing a lot of really important humanitarian work. How does having been to space, how did that really influence your choices of where you wanted to put your efforts now that your boots are back on the ground?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest way it did is, we talked about Earth gazing, right? Did you spend time looking out the window, and how much time was that? When I was looking out the window, I would routinely be hit in the gut with a sobering contradiction between the beauty of our planet on one hand and the unfortunate realities of life on our planet on the other hand. We all know that life on our planet is not always as beautiful as our planet looks from space. And it kind of filled within me a call to action. And one of the biggest things it did is, when I got into this routine when I was on the space station where I would almost say goodnight to the Earth. When it was time to get ready for bed, all my tasks were over for the day, I would go to the cupola, which I think is this windowed observatory on the bottom of the space station, and I would just gaze at the Earth for a while, and I'd think about, what is the next 50 years going to look like? What's the next 100 years going to look like? How far are we going to progress in solving the problems facing our planet? How far are we going to progress in overcoming the challenges that we face? And I launched into space with a belief that right now we already have all the technology, all the resources necessary to solve many, if not all, the problems facing our planet. And so I spent a good deal of my time earth gazing, pondering the question, if that's true, why do we still face so many critical issues? Why do we still face so many problems? And I think that the seeds to the answer to that question were planted on my first spaceflight. On the third spacewalk of that spaceflight, I had my feet clamped to the end of the space station's robotic arm. And with me attached to the arm, it flew me through this maneuver called the windshield wiper, it took me across this large arc across the top of the space station and back. And so at the top of this arc, I was 100 feet above the space station, and I'm looking down at the space station against the backdrop of our indescribably beautiful planet 240 miles below, and the scene just took my breath away. But I think more than the beauty of the scene, which was incredible, was the incredible human accomplishment that the International Space Station represented. It's probably the most complicated, complex structure ever built. It was built in space by 15 nations. Some of these nations weren't always the best of friends. Some of these nations were on opposite sides of the Cold War, opposite sides of the space race, but somehow we found a way to set aside our differences and work together and do this amazing accomplishment in space. And so I thought to myself, as I'm hovering above the space station, what would the world look like? How many less problems would we have if we had that same level of cooperation, that same level of collaboration, and brought it down to the Earth's surface? And so the answer to that question of why we still face so many critical issues in spite of our ample technology and resources lies in our inability to date to effectively collaborate on a planetary scale. And one of the things that we're trying to do to remedy that situation is we are physically trying to bring the collaboration and cooperation that built and sustains the International Space Station and bring it down to Earth and put it into the context of our rapidly developing, hyper-interconnected planetary society. And one of the ways we're trying to do that is an effort called Constellation. And what Constellation is a coalition that's led by a core of international astronauts from all around the world that are coming together to offer a message of hope, a message of a positive potential future that we can all have. And using this big picture perspective of our planet from space, not only from a spatial point of view or a geographic point of view, but from a temporal point of view, not looking at the next shareholder report or the next election cycle, but looking at things from a long-term point of view. How can we start to attack some of these problems facing us? And so we're framing this as a 100-year journey through space, a journey that began on December 24th, 1968. That is the day where we as a human species, for the first time ever, saw our planet hanging in the blackness of space. And that's when Apollo 8 came up from behind the dark side of the moon, and they took that famous picture, Earthrise. Mm-hmm. And we've never caught up with the meaning of that picture. That picture completely changed our perspective of ourselves, of our planet, of our place in the universe. And the truth of our world was revealed by that photograph. The truth that we are one people traveling on one planet towards one common future. And so we're asking people, this coalition, which has, like I said, the core is international astronauts, but we also have visionaries and futurists and scientists and students and pretty much anybody who cares about our planet, who cares about our society, who cares about our fellow crewmates on Spaceship Earth, to help us co-imagine what the future should look like in the year 2068. Not what type of technology necessarily will we have then, but what are the principles that we as a society want to be operating under 100 years after that first photograph of the planet from space by a human. So what's the basic operating system of our planet, and what is the roadmap to get there? Because, if you look at science fiction, a lot of these predictions of our future are apocalyptic, right? They're very, very negative.
Yeah.
And some might argue that we are on a path to those apocalyptic futures. But since we're framing this as a journey through space, any journey through space has a number of course corrections. We're using the best scientific data we have available. We figure out where we are. We've already determined where we want to go, what our target is. That's this destination in 2068. And we figure out what course corrections, what changes to our trajectory, what changes to the trajectory of our society do we need to make to hit our target. And so the most important of those course corrections is normally the mid-course correction. And so we're coming up in 2018 on the midpoint of our 100-year journey through space. So we're going to have a series of massive global events all around the world that are trying to nudge on a more positive trajectory our society.
Holy crap, it's almost been 50 years. 50 years? That's crazy.
Yeah.
This is first of all, so I almost can't come up with the right words. It's just so necessary. It's so meaningful. It's such an important coalition, such an important goal-oriented and, communal and international exercise, beyond an exercise. I mean, it's absolutely necessary. And I think that I sometimes can be caught up and I can get cynical, like we all can when we're, stuck in the news cycle, and lose perspective a little. But when it comes down to it, I think like you, when you step back and you actually have an evidence-based view of, our trajectory, the truth of the matter is that we may have stumbling blocks, and I think maybe this past election cycle and some of the things that are happening, most people might point to as some steps back that we've been taking. But when you look at the data as a whole and you start to look at the forest for the trees, you see that we're on a positive trajectory and things are better than they used to be. We are improving. Yeah, sometimes, like you mentioned, when we stop and we take a slice of time and we start to dissect exactly what's happening in that moment, we can point to all sorts of things that aren't where they need to be and all sorts of things that they feel like they're moving backward and away from progress. But of course, more people are living longer, healthier lives across the globe and have more access to technology than ever in the history of our entire planet. Like, we are moving in a good direction. And I think to be able to continue to course correct and maybe accelerate that movement is, it's a beautiful goal. And it's one that it just blows my mind that there are people who have a hard time getting on this bandwagon.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you that there's many metrics, if you will, that are incredibly improved and are the best that they've ever been, but there are also significant pitfalls. We're basically navigating a minefield in a lot of cases, especially when you look at environmental catastrophe that could possibly happen, et cetera. And going back to Constellation, I just want to that's not public yet, so we haven't told anybody about this yet. So if you're listening, don't tell anybody about it. It's secret. So.
And will people, like everyday people, the people who are listening right now, get to be involved and do their part?
You bet. That's the whole thing. We're crowdsourcing a positive vision of our future, and we're not only designing it, but we're going to start building it together. That's what this is all about. We are all riding through the universe together on the spaceship that we call Earth. We're all in this together. We're all family. The only way we're going to solve the challenges facing our world, facing our communities, is by working together. There's just no other way. The problems are too big. The potential disasters too imminent that we can't. A single organization, a single person, a single nation are not going to be able to affect the real change that we need to affect in the timeline that we need to affect it without working together and collaborating and cooperating.
Oh, gosh, this is so exciting. It's such an exciting time to be alive. And I really do think that we're all feeling that calling, that if we allow things, if we don't step up and we don't realize that we do need to be stewards and we do need to do our part, we can't just be, waiting. We can't just allow kind of the default status quo to continue to turn forward. We as individuals, all of us have to be, a part of this, and we have to make the decision to continue to make good decisions and to work together so that our planet can thrive and we can thrive and we can continue to do all of the incredible technological things that we've been doing for the past 50 years, that the next 50 years can be even more accomplished. And I have no doubt in my mind that we have the capacity for that. Like you said, the technology is there. And for many people, the will is there. It's just really ensuring that some of the minds that are in the way can be overcome, that we can push past some of the political stumbling blocks, and that we can, stop obsessing over these in-group, out-group differences and reach across the aisle and across the pond and across the planet and work with our peers. I mean, the fact that you were able to look down on Earth and realize in a blink of an eye, we're all connected, we're all related. We're one species. There are no subspecies of human beings. We're all the same. We literally all came from one common ancestor. It's powerful stuff to remember that. It really is. And sometimes in our daily life, we just don't.
Right. And I think we are really at a critical point in history right now. This is a pivotal moment in humanity. And we're going to look back on this and hopefully see that we made the right choices. And you brought up the decisions that we make and what's based on decisions. So what we're asking people to do is to zoom out to this bigger perspective, zoom out to what I call the orbital perspective, and make decisions from that perspective. And so what that means is, first and foremost, that when we're faced with a decision, we use the most credentialed, peer-reviewed scientific data available to figure out what the right course of the action is, right? So if you don't have the most accurate data, you can't make the most accurate predictions on what effect that decision's trajectory will be on our planetary society. So I think that's the first and foremost. The second one is that we have to make these decisions in the context of the entire world. We have to consider the big picture implications. So not only do we need to look at just the immediate area of concern and ask, we have to ask ourselves, will this cause harm elsewhere? So at a minimum, from the orbital perspective, a solution should be neutral outside the area of concern. Ideally, it would be beneficial and restorative. So, a lot of times today, decisions are made solely by party lines or other parochial or tribal factors, right? And so if maintaining party loyalty, for instance, is at the expense of the greater good, if that's the driving force of decision, then that course of action is fundamentally misguided, and it will be nothing but destructive in the long term. So that's two. So there's five of these. So let me get through them because I think if we follow these decision-making factors, we're going to be on a good path. And so the third one is you need to consider the long-term effects of a decision. And then by long-term, I mean multi-generational. So if we project out the effects of a course of action to our grandchildren's generation, we have to ask ourselves, are the effects positive and restorative, or are they detrimental? So if our grandchildren, for instance, will be harmed by a decision, then we're sacrificing our progeny for our own present benefit, which obviously is by definition not sustainable. Mm-hmm. And so the fourth one is decisions have to be open and transparent. The inputs that were used to make decisions have to be open and transparent, and obviously everything in the course of action. So the solutions basically have to permit everybody to see how the sausage is being made, right? And we have to ask ourselves, would the course of action survive being put in the spotlight? A lot of times, decisions require secrecy to be successful. And a lot of times they require secrecy because they're violating one of these other principles. So if they require secrecy, then pretty much that's probably a bad decision. And then finally, the decision has to be made with the priorities planet, society, economy, as opposed to economy, society, planet. And maybe just to talk about this one a little bit, because this is kind of the main thing that we're trying to do with Constellation. We're trying to flip people's perspective. When we looked out the window of the International Space Station, we didn't see the economy. We saw a iridescent biosphere teeming with life, right? So, yeah. But if you think about our political systems, if you think about our business systems, our cultural systems, they all treat everything, including the environment, as the wholly owned subsidiary of the economy. When reality is that our society is dependent on our biosphere and our economy is a product of our society. So what that means is we're living a lie. What it means is the economy is the wholly owned subsidiary of our environment, of our planet, of our biosphere. If you talk about climate change, for instance, the first victim of climate change is going to be the economy. The first victim of environmental destruction is going to be the economy. So you can't separate the two. And one is not, we have it completely upside down. We think the environment is nested under the economy when it's the other way around. And until we make that basic flip in our perspective, we're not going to be able to make good, long-term, efficient, productive, positive decisions. We're going to just continue down the path that will ultimately lead to destruction if taken to the end point that a lot of these decisions will take us to.
Absolutely. And it's funny how, for all intents and purposes, how easy it is to shift that perspective, to just take a step back. And of course, you don't have to physically be in space to look at the Earth in that way. And you don't even have to imagine what it looks like because we have so much incredible footage. We have so many incredible stories that are told. Your book, The Orbital Perspective, helps individuals reach that point of view. But it's also a philosophical, a psychological point of view that you can come to on your own, having never thought about being in space. Like that part of it, the equation is not necessary. It's just helpful.
You don't have to be in orbit to have the orbital perspective. And you know why it's so easy to make that shift in perspective? It's because we're not asking people to take some eco-philosophy or this is not a philosophy. This is the reality of the world that we live in. We have real problems that we're facing, and the only way we're going to solve them is by treating them in the real world, is attacking them in the real world. The real world is the fact of the world that we live in is our economy is dependent on our environment, not the other way around. So, and that's just one little piece of it, right? And so, until we start making those flips in perspective, we're not going to be able to have real solutions.
Absolutely. Well, Ron, oh my gosh, I'm so inspired by this conversation. I also feel like I've learned so much. I don't want to take up much more of your time, but I do close every episode by asking my guests the same two questions. And for you particularly, if I skip this, I will get so many emails from people complaining. So I can't wait to hear your answers. Are you ready for these two questions?
I don't know. It depends what they are. You're making me nervous. I'm starting to feel that fear that you were talking about before.
I think of anybody, you are probably ready for these because they really do involve a big picture perspective, which you have curated over so many years. So really, they're two sides of the same coin. The first question is that when you look to the future in whatever perspective is relevant to you right now, kind of whatever context is relevant, number one, what is the thing that worries you the most, that keeps you up the most at night, that makes you most concerned about the future? And number two, what are you most optimistic about? What do you really look forward to and get excited and hopeful for?
So what I'm most concerned about is the latest trend that we're seeing all around the world, where things are becoming more parochial, more tribal, where more two-dimensional, where it's us and there's them, and oversimplified, really, because when you look at the world, we live in a very complicated, complex world. Our world is filled with terrorism and environmental damage and crime and all these terrible things, wars and poverty and all this stuff. But it's also filled with compassion and love and ingenuity and creativity, innovation, and all these other wonderful things. And so, because we live in this complicated world, and because some of the negative factors of our world are so horrific, and induce such a level of fear in a lot of people, we tend to construct a simplified framework through which we view the world through, so that we can make all these complexities more palatable. But when we do that, what we tend to do is lump individuals, organizations, nations, cultures, religions, et cetera, into the cubbyholes of our self-constructed artificial framework. And by doing that, we wall ourselves off from the very people who have the pieces of the puzzle that we need to solve the problems that we face together. And so we don't live in a two-dimensional world. That's really obvious from space. We live in a multi-dimensional world that is very complicated and very complex, and solutions are not usually reduced to a soundbite, and are not usually short-term solutions. They have to be enacted over a long time frame. And so my concern is that we are using this fear-based framework to make critical decisions that are affecting the trajectory of our society, that not only separate us from the people who have the solutions, but are causing problems in and of themselves. So that's the first part of the question. That's what worries me the most. But in spite of all that, I am incredibly optimistic about our future, and I'm incredibly optimistic about our future because this darkness, and it is a darkness, and I don't want to sound like anybody's immune from this. We all do this. I do this myself. I set up these, subconsciously or subconsciously, I have my own framework that I view the world through, for better or for worse, and everybody does it. But what I'm seeing as a trend is that the darkness that can instill, the fear, the violence, the lack of empathy, the lack of compassion that can breed, is being overcome by the light of compassion. And what really makes me the most optimistic is seeing the younger generation, seeing this generation that sees these problems and sees these challenges and refuses to accept the status quo on our planet. A younger generation that realizes that we need to work together and has now the technological tools to work together. Never before in the history of humanity is it easier to collaborate and cooperate with people all around the world, regardless of their geographic location, their political ideology, or any other factor. And so we can now seamlessly combine and align points of creativity, points of innovation, points of progress into unified, coordinated action. That's what I meant before when I said, we have the technology to overcome this stuff, because we have the technology now for the first time in history to work together and to solve these problems collectively together. And so I am filled with tremendous optimism. This light that this shines, that the light of collaboration will more than overcome the darkness that this latest trend that we're seeing around the world is preventing us from solving the problems that we're facing. And so, I think I'm all in all, I'm very optimistic, but I think I'm a realist too, and I understand that there's a lot of these challenges that we have to overcome.
I agree. And I think that this message of hope is really necessary for people who can become easily overwhelmed, which it's very hard not to do in today's society, especially if you're really plugged into the news cycle. And so it's important for us to keep, like you said, doing these course corrections in our own minds so that we can see that it's not all for naught. We are improving. We will continue to improve. And the decisions and the actions that we take matter. They have a positive outcome, just like you so beautifully spelled out for us. So Ron, I have to thank you for joining me today. It was just incredibly inspirational and really eye-opening to have you on the program. I know that my listeners feel the same way. So thank you so much for being here.
Oh, you bet, Cara. And I kind of singled out the younger generation, the millennials, I guess. But I'm seeing that trend across the board. It's not just millennials. I'm seeing it across the board. Even old people like me are starting are starting to get it. So, I got a lot of hope for the future.
Absolutely. And guys, you should check out Ron's book, The Orbital Perspective. You can grab it anywhere books are sold. And also, Ron, let everybody know, because you're so active in social media, let them know where they can find you across platforms.
Oh, okay. Well, you can find Constellation at constellation.earth. And I'm astro_Ron on Twitter. And just Ron Garan on Facebook. And you can find me on Instagram and Google Plus and all the things that are out there. I'm on there. You can find me.
Yeah, guys, and I highly recommend following, because not only will you see all sorts of great inspirational content, he writes all the time and he's a wonderful writer, but also beautiful images that really help maintain that perspective we've been talking about this whole time. So once again, Ron, thank you for joining me, and everybody listening, thank you for coming back week after week. I'm really looking forward to the next time we all get together to talk nerdy.